All right. So the book we're going to be drawing on today is Christian Healing, which is a compilation of talks and lessons by Charles Fillmore that he and Myrtle developed early on in their work. This was published in 1909 and is based on what they were doing in the early 1900s, having gotten pretty well established by that point. And it's not organized quite the same way as either Ph.D. or Hopkins. Everyone does their own thing, but it is a set of lessons. And it starts with the idea of being. Okay, the statement of being is always the foundation. And one of the things that he wants us to really get is that there is a difference between the metaphysical approach and the religious approach, and that a metaphysical Christian is going to see things differently from a religious Christian. So even though he's using the term Christian, he is not talking about the traditional perspective. And the way he starts out in lesson 1 to help us see that is where the Christian would say Father, Son, and Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit. The metaphysician will say something like mind, idea, expression. The source, the empowered piece, aspect of the source, and the way that interaction shows up. Or another one, spirit, soul, and body, and that's how we experience it. Another one that he says is present everywhere, and this was back in 1909, so this was right about the time that the Copenhagen theory was emerging in quantum physics. And he says that physicists understand that every atom has intelligence, life force, and substance in it. So those are the 3 aspects of the building blocks of all that is. And then he is helping us to see that as we get to know our own mind, and that's some of what you guys are talking about today, as we see what's going on in us, we can begin to understand that mind, which forms ideas, which come into expression, right? And that our physical experience is the expression of the idea, what the Native Americans would call the spirit of something. So coyote or raven with a capital R or capital C is the essence, the essential archetype. And the idea of humanity is an archetypal idea in the mind of God, and that each of us are specific expressions of that idea, and all of us in physical form are expressing that idea. So he's trying to help us understand that the God mind, that idea, is constantly expressing in each and every one of us the perfect idea, the perfect being, the real and perfect being. That's always, he says, trying to or needing to or aiming to or striving to express in each of us. It's always there, and we're the only thing stopping it is our thoughts and words. Otherwise, it would be expressing itself perfectly in us. So when I talk about the transition humanity is going through, what's happening is we are reducing the amount of stoppage of that perfect idea in our life and in our world. And then he goes on to say, the more we think about this, the more we contemplate this, the more we sit with this idea or repeat phrases to go with it. And his book, Christian Healing, does include lists of words to repeat over and over again at the end of each lesson. But he says, when we understand our perfect nature, our true nature, we begin to experience a new level of consciousness just in the understanding, which Hopkins alludes to, but here he is saying, if we understand our perfect nature, that new level of consciousness must rise within us, all right? And that then becomes what he calls the second birth. Some people call it born again or born from above, right? That process of both mental adjustment and body transformation that happens when that understanding leads to that state of consciousness in which the perfect idea is what we are focused on and thinking about and speaking from. So for him, moving with his students at that time, which unfortunately is not being taught in Unity today, or probably for the last 50 years based on my experience, but it is what was going on 100 and 120 years ago. Now, some of you know that Charles Fillmore wrote something called the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. I alluded to it when I did the show. And what he was trying to help us understand is that if we read the Bible as the metaphor, it is the description of our own metaphysical journey. And it is also the description of how the divine mind works. And the usual example that he uses is the book of Genesis, the first chapter in the book of Genesis. And he says it represents 6 great idea projections from divine mind, each more comprehensive, more complex than the previous. The final climax, he says, is reached in the 6th degree when the declaration is made that being, described as man, shall appear, having dominion over every thing or idea that precedes it. All right. So we, in that perfect sense, have the capacity to transform, to change, to modify, to, invite, to experience more fully all the forms that are created in the book of Genesis prior to humanity. So he's trying to get us to that place where we begin to realize we are not stuck in this concept that we've been handed, and we are not subject to anything in the world around us. He says the physical body is the projection of our human idea. So if you want to know what you think, look at your body. If you want to know what you believe, look at your world. And on page 49 in the book, Christian Healing, he starts talking about people with stomach problems. They have been striving and grasping, people with kidney stones. I've been mourning over a great loss. And he has half a dozen of those in this little book to show how the thoughts are actually producing conditions in the body. And he says a majority of the ills that afflict the body have their origin in erroneous thoughts. So the metaphysician, which is what we are all being when we're doing these practices, does not concern ourselves with the action and reaction of chemistry and matter, electricity, magnetism, only with the action of the thought. So we're watching the thought process. And this is what Louise Hay is talking about in her book, Heal the Body. Okay? And there's 2 pieces that the metaphysician needs to do. And one is to deny the error idea. And he describes that as that's like erasing a mistake you made in arithmetic. It's just an eraser. I kind of like that. So this was, oops, I went the wrong direction in my calculation here. I'm going to erase that. And now I'm going to calculate it properly. And like Emma, he often refers to the process of doing arithmetic or other forms of mathematics as part of what we're doing. And like Emma, he's very into logically reasoning and scientifically exploring all of these ideas so that we can have the whole brain engaged in this process and not be having to shut down part of the brain in order to have access to this power. And so that's actually part of why He doesn't do things like go into trance or this other stuff. He's not trying to shut down the normal brain. He's trying to invite it to come along with, to be in alignment with. And as he puts it, little by little, cast out specific thoughts. He literally says you cannot do it all at once. You have to do it little by little. And if we look at their life story, you may remember that it took Myrtle a little while, a few weeks and months to show up as healthier, and a couple of years to be completely freed of her symptoms. And it took him, from 50 to 70 to get back to a 50-year-old body. He was in a 70-year-old body at 50 and in a 50-year-old body at 70 and a 70-year-old body at 90, right? Because of doing this work little by little. So every thought is always affecting all matter. It's affecting the body and the world around in every single thought. It sends out a vibration. That vibration is matched in the world around us. And he says that the extent of the effect is proportionate to the thinker's ability to concentrate mental forces. All right. So a fleeting thought doesn't have quite the power that a thought that has no conflicting ideas behind it. Right. So a fleeting thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, only if there is no conflicting idea will have any power. Right. So some of us have had synchronicities where we've had what we thought was a fleeting thought, but we were so in alignment with that idea that it really was our whole being having that thought.
Reverend Ruth, can I ask a question?
Yes, Tony.
I remember when you were talking about the history of unity at the Beaverton Church a while ago, you talked about Charles Fillmore going into contemplation as opposed to meditation. And I've been really fascinated with that concept. And is that what you're speaking of now a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. And, he is contemplating the nature of divine mind, contemplating the nature of the idea of the perfected being, contemplating all the qualities, right, rather than trying to shut down his thinking process. So he's integrating rather than separating, right? All right.
So in other
So
words, he's thinking about God, like just thinking, turning his mind to contemplating God. Is that what I'm hearing?
that's a shorthand, you're right. But all of the qualities, not just what is that old man in the sky, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. How is it that this creative process is happening in and through me? How is it that my world is reflecting the ideas that I'm having? What is the perfect idea? What does it look like, feel like, taste like, smell like? Try it on. Try on the perfect idea of your own being. What does that feel like? That's all forms of contemplation, yeah?
Huh. Tony, you're muted.
Well, I'm surprised everyone was quiet when I was muted anyway. But I'm surprised that where Eckhart Tolle says stillness speaks, perhaps Charles Fillmore would say contemplation speaks, or that wasn't the word I was going to use, but it was going to be something like we could just go with contemplation speaks.
That works. Many churches in the unity tradition have be still and know on their wall. I am stilling my thinking about business so that I can focus on the divinity. I am not separating them. I'm just shifting my focus. Whereas if I'm going into meditation, I'm literally attempting to stop my normal thought process.
I think it's a very distinct process, but speaking personally, I believe that I can always be shown the next right step in something. Not maybe.
Oh, absolutely. You just need to be open.
And just by saying that at hand to me is not perhaps the long-term answer to anything I am facing or dealing with, but I always will know what the next right step is, requires contemplation and not pure meditation, because I need to allow that thought to come into my mind, to act upon it, to treat and move my feet, so to speak,
Exactly. And when Esther Hicks was being taught to meditate, she was discarding all of these guidance that was trying to come through to her. And then they realized her nose was spelling out letters while she was meditating. And they got it that, there really was something that, the spirit was trying to share with her. So yes, meditation is shutting it down. Yes, Linda.
So when we have those fleeting thoughts, and a short time later, what we were thinking about, the universe delivers, it was really our whole being at that moment in that thought.
Bingo. Right. There wasn't anything else in us except that thought for that instant. Yep. And that's one of the ways you can know. You can look at, oh, look, that was delivered. What was I thinking? What was I feeling? What happened right before that? Where was I? All of that can help you see the process. Right? And Emma made the point, if you're accidentally healing people, that's what you're doing. All right. So Charles was very big on the word prayer. He says prayer is natural. It is the language of spirituality. And he suggests that prayer should be cultivated to round out our character. Now, if you think of prayer as just spouting words, then there's no rounding going to happen there, right? If you think of prayer as begging and pleading some greater power, there's still very little rounding that's going to happen, except there would be that realization of, oh, I am, in the 12 steps, my normal thinking is powerless in this situation. There must be some greater power that can take care of this. So there is a little bit of a shift in that form of prayer. But he says, when we pray believing that our prayer may or may not be answered, we are missing the mark, which is an interpretation of the Greek word that is usually interpreted as sin. Isn't that interesting? It is a sin to believe that your prayer may or may not be answered. You are missing the mark. Fascinating. And then he says, or to pray believing that it'll be fulfilled sometime in the future means that the response will come sometime in the future. Who knows when, right? And both of them are missing the mark, because the law of the word is that it is fulfilled as it is spoken. It's not that it's waiting out there sometime for us to become aware of it. It's that it is fulfilled as it is spoken. And we have to get out of the way and allow ourselves to experience it, right? So then he says, prayer is cumulative. As we enter that state of prayer, knowing that health is here, knowing that the abundant supply, whatever it is that we are being called into prayer for, it accumulates spiritual substance, life, and intelligence. It accumulates all that we call matter, right? Every atom has substance, life force, and intelligence, right? So prayer accumulates the spiritual stuff that makes up the universe in alignment with the words that are spoken. So if we're speaking them in a, gee, please, maybe someday kind of way, that's going to accumulate in that way. I'm thinking of the story of the poor man who died and was, angry at God for never providing any of the things that he asked for. And God takes him to this place where all of these riches have been waiting to be given to him, but he never claimed them. It's like he never went to the coat check room to get his coat. Right? Yeah. So prayer is cumulative. It accumulates spiritual substance, life, and intelligence. It accumulates everything necessary to our fullest expression. Right? This is huge. And this is something Wallace Wattles was talking about in The Science of Getting Rich. The universe is designed to support our fullest development, our fullest expression of who we are. Entering into the state of prayer facilitates that accumulation into our experience. When we pray, he says, in spiritual understanding, that is, knowing all of these things at such a level, we've begun to be in that new state of consciousness. We've had this new birth. The very mind of God is joined to the mind of humanity. And that's what Jesus was saying when he said, in my Shem, in my nature, in my state of being. Pray in my state of being, and the answers are always there right away. So Charles is using the scriptures from a slightly different point of view. Charles was a bit heretical too, all right? So the important thing here, he's saying, is that we get to that place of consciousness in which our spiritual understanding is what we are operating from. Now, it's, and it accumulates. So we start out a little bit and we get more and we get more and we get more. And then there is this process that we cannot make happen, but we continue to show up for, in which the body is shifted and the world is shifted with it. And we feel and know that when we claim something, it is so. And this is the point where Jesus says, the Father and I are one, right? There's no separation between the power of the divine and the power of my own word. The divine word and my word are one word. Okay? So it's important that we pray with that understanding, understanding the law of the word, understanding the spiritual essence of our being, and that we always give thanks that our prayers are answered and fulfilled now, so that we don't get in the habit of believing in appearances. Okay.
That's why we added now to the end of the prayer of protection.
Exactly. That's right. There is no, all is well now. Yes. Regardless of appearances. The appearances are coming through the filter of the culturally trained brain. They're not coming through the actual experience and expression that we are. And that, by the way, is all on page 71 of Christian Healing. And page 49 is where he starts talking about specific symptoms. He's saying that we need to understand that we have the power to deny and dissolve all disease-forming or discordant or any dissonant words that we've experienced. We have that power to deny and dissolve all of these words. So a lot of the way that some people will do treatment is to follow the lessons, and they will say, you know, that we are fully present in the beingness and are free from blank, 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 whatever discord there has been. And free from that, we now claim this next phase of being that we're ready for, right? So the interesting thing that happens, as Lacey was pointing out, is when we start to claim ourselves free of some things, they start showing up in some interesting ways for us to free ourselves further. And so sometimes the world appears to be giving us the contrary to what it is we are aiming for. And Emma calls that's the world that was supported by our belief system coming unglued so that we can replace the old belief system with a new one. For Charles, there was an error thought, and I can dissolve that now. There was an error thought, I can dissolve that now. As I dissolve the error thought and claim the truth, the more I do it, the more I enter into that state of being, which becomes the spiritual understanding, the state of consciousness in which the truth spoken through me, by me, and as me must be my experience. Can't not be. Yes? And then that point, we feel that it has happened and we are so grateful. Our gratitude, it's not, I got to remember to say thank you. It's that we are just overwhelmed with the gratitude of it. Oh, wow, look, it's happening. I can feel it. Oh, that feels so good. Thank you, thank you, thank you, right?
Reverend Ruth,
Yes,
how
Cody.
would you be willing to compare and contrast what you just spoke with a spiritual mind treatment from religious science?
They are essentially the same, except that in traditional religious science, there's no negation in the statements. There's unification and declaration and gratitude and release. Okay. Now that's assuming you're already in spiritual understanding. And all you need is a few words to remind yourself so that you're operating at that level of consciousness. Now, Michael's nodding and wagging his head because he teaches this stuff.
Well, I've heard of more than one minister say, or science of mind minister say, if you got the first two steps, you're done.
This
Right?
is true.
Yeah.
Unification. If you are feeling unified and you declare, you are done. But in the gratitude, what we are doing is bringing the body self and the perceptual framework into alignment with the truth that we have declared.
Whatever the methods that's used in New Thought, I think that the most important thing is consciousness.
Mhm.
It does, you know, whether it's a 5-step method, a 7-step method, an 84-step method, it's all around consciousness, and that sometimes that individuals get, what I've seen is they get caught up into the formula,
Yep.
not into the consciousness.
Yep.
So that's why classes like this for me are very important, because it's not about the steps, it's about consciousness, my awareness. So that's
Right.
my 2 cents.
You're beautiful, Michael. Thank you. And Albert was practicing the 15 times of the Lord's Prayer, and that is one way to get into the consciousness, right? You can use the formula to get to the consciousness if all else fails, right? And the goal is to be living in that consciousness, which is why Emma was saying, fill your mind continually with these ideas, with these words, with these ways of experiencing and expressing self and the universe, right? And Fillmore is absolutely clear. Everything that we've just said is totally natural. It is aligning ourselves with the natural process, because the natural process is the divine mind. It's the idea in the divine mind, the divine beingness, if you will. It is the idea, and if capital I. And as we allow ourselves to experience ourselves as that idea, which is what unification means, and we'll talk more about those in later classes, but right now we're talking about the Fillmores. So as we allow ourselves to feel that unification in the divine mind, where we are the ideal perfection expression of the original idea, Okay. In the Course in Miracles, this would be the Son of God. That's us in the ideal form. We are that. We can't be separated from that. There's not someone out there who is that. We all are. But we aren't aware of it normally because we got caught up in all these culturally entrained details that have nothing to do with our actual life. Our actual life, our real life, as opposed to the appearance, right? Yeah. So Charles contemplated the nature of the divine until he couldn't separate himself from it. Is that a good way to think of it? Because our culture is the only, it's an erroneous idea that we are separate from it. Right? So we contemplate its nature until we can't separate ourselves from it. We use reasoning if necessary. We use logical processes. We use our emotions. We use our sensations. We use our inner vision and inner awareness to feel the connectedness. We do whatever we need to do in the form of contemplation to feel that unification, that oneness, that we are that truth, that beingness, that power, that idea. And from there, we claim, as happening now, whatever is, was, thought, whatever. And you can see when you're already in the idea, you can't think of the problem, can you? So you're not going to describe the problem. That's where the unification and declaration are enough, right? It's not that John has so-and-so, so I'm declaring it's fixed. No. It's, I know without a doubt that John and I are both the perfected expression of the ideal that we are here to be. And there is nothing, no form, no matter, no life form, no any idea that could possibly get in the way of that because it is truth. So I can logically reason it, but I have to be in that place of knowing it and feeling it and not being in any way separated from the reality of it. Now, hopefully, when you guys tune in on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2, you get a glimpse of what that's about. Yes? That's my experience anyway. We get glimpses of what that's about. And hopefully we can carry it forward. So that was what I wanted to say about Fillmore. What I didn't talk to you about is what Myrtle did. Myrtle took these ideas and wrote them in letters to everyone who called in with a problem. So Myrtle would say, I'm sitting here in this heavenly experience, and I see you as the perfect expression of the divine. And I know that in your perfection, there is no possibility of whatever. And then she goes further and further in it. So her letters became a prayer treatment. And you can get a glimpse of those in the book called Myrtle's Healing Letters, which are just a tiny, tiny fraction. The woman was answering letters day after day after day for what, from 1888 to 1931. That's a long time. And helping other people do the same. So that's another way. And that actually, Linda, that's kind of related to what you were saying. She wrote all her letters by hand. Yeah.
I still struggle a little bit with trying to think of me, the personality, human me, being one with the divine.
I can't imagine.
And
welcome to our culture.
yeah, and I can still feel the, my mom's slap across the face when, you're not, you will not be egotistical, although she didn't know the meaning of that word, but it was like, no, you're not pretty, you're not this, you're not that, and you're terrible if you think you are. And so when I start getting that effervescent feeling that I'm getting close to it,
Mhm.
then one of these little twinges comes up that reminds me that I shouldn't feel that way.
Thank you for voicing what everyone in the room is feeling. It may not have come the same way, but yes, we all got told the same thing. And yeah, so this is why we have to release and forgive the people, right? Because that woman was doing the best she could to have you be effective and successful in our culture. Yeah. She honestly believed that was the best way to do that. I'm sad that it happened that way for anyone that has those experiences. I had my version of those experiences. And how about seeing all of that like a movie, like a novel, like a process that built a framework for you to move into your fullest development, not an experience that was depriving you of your fullest development. Okay. Now, we all have our version of that, and I know about 2 or 3 of yours, so I'm others of you, so I'm aware of that. So what if I can see all of that is mostly about the other person, not about me? Mostly it's the story of their process, not my process. And what if I can see my process as being the unaffected divine being that Jesus on the cross was, right? That unaffected beingness that is there so that that person can get through that process. Linda.
The idea of almost instantly changing that thought into more of a movie removes me out of the equation, out of the situation.
Bingo. Yep.
I'm only observing it, and that's easy to dissolve.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very powerful.
Very glad that you got that tool today. That's yay. Because we are that being lovingly observing all these other beings who are showing us what it is that we are thinking, feeling, ready to experience, right? And wow, okay. And that doesn't have to be how I live, right? That's, yeah, what I've observed, but not how I have to live. Okay. So if you were Fillmore at this point in your life, we're almost done. If you were Fillmore at this point, you would spend some time, this will be our exercise, spend some time contemplating the perfection of the divine mind's ideal, the perfect ideal in divine mind coming into expression. Just contemplate that in you or around you or in some other universe somewhere, it doesn't matter. But this is the contemplation. Contemplate the perfect ideal coming into expression in, through, and as divine mind. Practice that, and it'll be easier to get into that state of the understanding that allows then the word to have all the power.